Welcome back, Seekers and Saints, to Fire in the Bones vlog. And today we're referencing back to the sermon of August 20th. So if you want a little bit of a reference for that, go back and listen to that. But even if you missed it, today shouldn't be too hard to get. So during the sermon, Pastor Shane brought up a very beautiful example that I want to specify and I want to hone in on. And today I'm calling it, if you read the title, the Sanhedrin Sin. More on that in a minute. So Pastor Shane brought up how it's unfortunate when we are happy to, in the past as a church, parade up the teenage pregnant girl so we could ask her to confess her sins in front of the whole congregation in utter shame. But the guy who's making her do it is full of naked, greedy ambition and is ruining the church with his greed and anger and angst, which is also a sin. But somehow that's acceptable. It's not as bad as this sin. And the result is that he makes a hypocrite of himself. So that got me thinking about an interesting story back from youth group. When I was in youth group here at Parma Heights, we had one morning, two of the guys, Matt Hickey and Ryan Dewey. I remember this explicitly. Matt Hickey did a little drama where he said, well, I was stacking wood the other day and a little bit of dust got in my eye and it's kind of annoying. I don't know how to get it out. Ryan Dewey came running into the room going, I'll help you, while holding a giant stick out of his eye like this, kind of like this, you know? And they, he said, whoa, let me get that stick out of your eye before we get the dust out. And obviously this was a reference to Matthew 7 verses 3 and 5 where it says, don't you see the plank in your own eye? I want to take, and that's a perfectly good verse for this example that Shane gave, but I want to take a different verse set. I want to take 1 Corinthians 5 verses 7 through 12. A little bit of context. So Paul is writing to the Corinthians rather, and he's addressing the fact that a man was dating and having sexual relations with his mother-in-law. And he was bemoaning that fact, but also bemoaning, you guys are cheering him on. And he says these verses here. You know that saying a little bit of yeast makes the whole batch of dough rise. You must remove the old yeast of sin so that you will be entirely pure. Then you will be like a new batch of dough without any yeast, as indeed I know you actually are. So here Paul is comparing the church to Passover bread without yeast for God's special purpose. But when you put that yeast in, it's not for God's purpose anymore, because now we start changing the form of the church. And we do that when we decide to have what I call a Sanhedrin sin, that being a sin that is acceptable. Think about the Sanhedrin. We could think about the sins they did: greed, arrogance, judgment. They did all of those things. They had the money changers in the temple courts, for crying out loud. And that was acceptable. But you know what wasn't acceptable? Adultery. That one was worthy of death. But defaming the temple courts? Well, there's money involved. It's complicated. It's complex. Or maybe they even justified it by saying, well, we're selling stuff for the offerings. How can we be wrong? So by essentially justifying or ignoring their sin, they did so by laser focusing on another one. This one is unacceptable. This one, we're just going to forget that's a problem or justify it. And that's exactly what Pastor Shane mentioned in his example. So the question I have for us and me, I look in the mirror when I say this, do you have a Sanhedrin sin? Do you condemn one another? Do you parrot your favorite political pundit, no matter what horrible, vapid, vulgar thing they say? And by the way, vulgar speech need not be profanity. It could be calling someone dirty. It could be calling someone a Satanist. It could be calling someone otherly human. It could be degrading them to a level that God does not view them at. That's enough. That's slander right there. Do you accept, speaking of slander, do you slander people within the church because they don't live up to your perfect standard? I know I've done it. My wife has called me on it, and I felt horribly ashamed when she caught me on it. Is hate okay as long as you're hating the right person, such as a transgendered person? Yeah, I went there. Because at the end of the day, you can't say this batch of yeast is bad, but this one is, I mean, it's not as much, right? It's not that bad, right? According to Paul, it is. Paul points out just a teeny bit's enough. I don't know if this is true, but I once heard that a teaspoon of oil in a Navy ship's water supply will contaminate the whole batch. So half a teaspoon is okay? I mean, would you do that? I like how Pastor Shane put it a few weeks ago. If a fly was on your food, well, it was only a maggot, not a full fly. Is that okay? And the answer is no. No, it wouldn't be okay. So, if you have a Sanhedrin sin, if you answered yes to any of those, there's really only one answer. Stop. Reevaluate yourself, including me. This goes double for me. Are we allowing a sin to creep in? Even if it's just a minority of people or a small part of my thinking, are we allowing it to creep in? Because if it is, we're going to make hypocrites of ourselves. We're going to become the Sanhedrin that Jesus was always warning against. In fact, that's the conclusion of the matter, isn't it? If you judge sin by flavor or hide your own as being not as significant, you make hypocrites of us all, and you curtail the reason of the church. You curtail the whole mission, because now we're just a special us club. So keep that in mind. This is not to be a condemnation. I mean, yeah, it is, but it's a condemnation as me as well. I admit I have Sanhedrin sin. We need to always be looking out for that. Thanks for tuning in. I look forward to seeing you next time. And as I said, go back and check out Shane's sermon on August 20th, a real good one. And I'll see you next time on Fire in the Bones.